Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Ben Hutt with us. Ben, thanks for coming on the program.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be exciting because you are the CEO of Cheezburger Inc., and it has a number of sites that I know people have heard of. ICANN has Cheezburger, MemeBase, Failblog, and a lot of other ones. And these sites receive hundreds of millions of views a year. And you're also the founder of Circa, which is a new way to consume news. So you know a lot about growth, a lot about distribution, and just a lot about the internet, really. So let's start with ICANN has Cheezburger. It wasn't your creation, but you were able to recognize that this site of cat photos might be the future of entertainment. I don't think anybody else saw that. But first tell me, how did you originally get involved with ICANN has Cheezburger?
So I had this job. I was living in a suburb outside of Seattle, and I had this job, and it was a fine job, but I really didn't enjoy working there. So I actually decided that I wanted to go back to being an entrepreneur. I'd been an entrepreneur once before. When that opportunity came, I had a choice between going to work for a startup in the Valley or going to actually run this site called ICANN has Cheezburger. So I actually ended up deciding to be my own boss again and actually raise money from a bunch of angel investors to actually start a company. The company wasn't called Cheezburger, but it is called Cheezburger. We took the last word out of ICANN has Cheezburger and turned it into a company name. And so we bought ICANN has Cheezburger, we bought Failblog, we actually started MemeBase and a bunch of other websites. So we actually ended up turning this one asset of this cat picture website into a media network.
All right, so what is it that you knew that others didn't that allowed you to look at a cat photo website and say, yes, that is the future of media and entertainment, because no one else was seeing that?
Honestly, I can't say that I had some kind of genius that allowed me to see that. It really was looking at the numbers dispassionately and saying, hey, actually there's a real business here. We knew that pretty close to getting pretty close to the revenue that they're already generating, that it could pay for my salary or pretty close to it. And we ended up actually being profitable after the first quarter of existence. So the numbers were pretty compelling. Now, the real risk there was this a fad, right? And for me, that's when you actually have to trust your gut. What we relied on wasn't the asset that's in the photo, which is cat pictures. What we actually relied on is, what's the macro trend here? The macro trend is that the internet is going to actually allow people to create content on their own and actually generate their own entertainment. And participation-driven entertainment is far more interesting than just sitting back and watching and leaning back.
I got you. So the insight wasn't cat photos are funny. The insight was that people are going to start generating their own entertainment in the future instead of always just taking in what the big media empires are giving to them. So I've heard you say before.
That's why cat photos are inherently funny.
They are funny. I'll give you that.
That wasn't in dispute. So.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think it's another great point that you were able to look at the numbers of the business dispassionately as a business, because I think it'd be hard to get over the fact that it's cat photos, but yet you looked at the numbers and said it's a business. So that in and of itself, I'm sure there's an insight there. Now, you talked about trends earlier, the trends of this user-generated entertainment. And I've heard you say before that you actually enjoy reading fiction because it allows you to see the future instead of reading nonfiction, which is about the past. Explain that to me a little bit.
Yeah, so fiction tells you about how the world could be. It's forward-looking, whereas I think business books and things like that tend to be past-looking. And I'm not advocating that you do one to the exclusion of the other. I think what people have to do is, especially people who are in business, love business books. And where has that gotten us so far? Right? It hasn't gotten us very far. I think there's some great business books out there, but what we do is we end up kind of taking a steering wheel and jerking it too far to the right. We end up not making these smooth motions to drive our business forward, and I'm guilty of the same thing. So I prefer that we have a more balanced diet when it comes to reading.
Yeah. So when you're leading your businesses, you're not necessarily thinking, what's the new thing that all the business gurus are doing. You're just kind of looking at your business saying, what do we need to do? Is that fair or no?
That is absolutely right. I tend to be more of an inward-looking CEO, although my job actually has me doing a lot of external stuff. I use that external data to say, what are we doing? What are we doing as a company? How is our culture? How is our momentum? How are our employees doing? That's what I'm really focused on.
Because of that, how different are things in your company as opposed to the people that are following the business gurus? Do you actually come to the same conclusion just on your own, or does it look totally different?
You know, that's what's fascinating about business is that there's no one right answer for everybody. I think there are principles and foundations that you can build your company on, and those actually color the decisions that you end up making. So for us, company culture is super important. We have a company culture that I think is really good. I would love it for it to be great. There are role models that I look up to, but their answers are not the same as my answers. I'll have to go find my own answers there.
Yeah. All right. So Ben, seeing these trends has really what's allowed you to, make profitable websites because you saw things that maybe others didn't or a little bit earlier than others did. Is there any trends now that you and your team are really keeping an eye on as of this might be something, let's watch it unfold a little bit?
So I'll tell you the trend that's been really interesting to us over the last 2 years. It's been the rise of mobile. So I ask this question to people when I go out to conferences, and it usually kind of stumps them a little bit. A lot of entertainment is about filling the gap time, or the time where we just want to be entertained and don't want to do anything else, or we're just bored. So what did people do when you were lining up at a coffee shop waiting for one of these? What did people do before the smartphones?
Talk to people? I don't know.
I'm pretty sure you didn't do that.
Sit silently and awkwardly in line.
Yeah, you just stared at the back of people's heads. Right? Now we're filling all those times where we used to stare at the back of people's heads with our mobile phones, and we use entertainment, games, and things like that to actually fill that time. That's an amazing opportunity for upstarts like us because we're not actually taking market share from existing things. We're not actually having to compete against a entrenched competitor with distribution channels and marketing. What we're doing is finding time when there was none before. We're actually creating an economy where there wasn't any before.
I gotcha.
It's really fascinating.
Is that why that different formats are going to flourish? Because a 30-second format will work, and a 5-minute format, and a 10-minute format, and a 10-hour format, because the gaps are different sizes all throughout the day?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is that we have to create different media products. The theory behind Cheezburger is actually the same thing as Circa. And so with Circa, I'm a co-founder there. Matt Galligan's the CEO. Arsenio Santos is our CTO. The three of us co-founded the company together. And the idea there was most media consumption in the future will happen on a mobile device. News is an incredibly important part of that experience. However, the products that have been created for consumption of news does not fit the way people use mobile devices. So how do we do that? How do we use push notifications? How do we use the ability for people to use social sharing and following? How do we actually create content that is visible and viewable and understandable on a mobile device that's better than what's long, huge articles?
Yeah.
And so we worked on that at Circa, and the same thing was for Cheezburger. But with Cheezburger, we kind of stumbled across it. With Circa, we had a much clearer thesis because I've been spending years honing my craft at Cheezburger.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this, and maybe I'm wrong with the way I see this, but it seems like mobile apps in general, not the entertainment ones, but the ones about productivity and those kind of things, it almost seems like they've hit their heyday, and now it's really hard to get distribution, and it's really hard to get adoption. But entertainment, it seems like it's on the rise. I mean, everyone's still buried in Facebook all the time on mobile. Is that the right way to see it, or am I totally off there?
I can't tell you if you're right or wrong, but that wouldn't stop me from trying. You've seen the big demand for mailbox on iOS.
True.
Recently. And you can make an argument that desktop is not a growing industry, right? That people have their apps and that's it. But there is an opportunity to displace. In fact, I think what is happening is that people get really used to using their mobile phones, and they'll sit at their desk and use their phone because the experience of having something visceral in your hand that you can move around, the interface is better. But there are many cases where using a phone for something isn't very good, and so people use their desktop. So I think there is some reshuffling and reprioritization of people's behavior, and as that starts to happen, I think there's continuously more opportunities being created for people to create new tools.
Yeah. How many years do we have left before we saturate mobile? I mean, are we at the beginning of a 10-year run here, or do we got like a year and a half left?
I think you're looking at a first generation of mobile users. You're looking at, and so when I travel overseas, this is really fascinating to watch, especially if you go to developing countries. People don't have laptops. Laptops are expensive, they're bulky, they're likely to be stolen or broken, and so people don't use laptops. And their primary computing devices tends to be phones, and they're still mostly on feature phones. And so smartphones still haven't gotten the penetration overseas, and those people will not use smartphones in concert with a desktop, it'll be exclusively smartphone. So that generation of behavior that we have not yet seen,
Yeah.
right, is an entirely new market because they're going to have to do everything on portable devices without a keyboard, whereas
Yeah.
we actually have this other thing we can fall back on. And so our behavior in developed countries are different. And what we're seeing is that there's this leapfrogging effect where developing countries will create a new standard or they'll figure out how to do something in their way, and then we'll come back and say, hey, that's really interesting. Let's build something that's even better, right? And so you see this kind of cannibalization of previous behavior that happens as generations grow up based on different technologies.
Yeah. I've heard it said before that whenever there's a new media outlet like, cable television, that someone has to figure out what type of things are supposed to be on that new media outlet. So MTV came along, and it's like, oh, that's what cable is. It's not radio on TV, it's MTV. And then the internet comes along. You have to kind of figure out, oh, it's I Can't Has Cheezburger. That's the internet. MTV was cable. I Can't Has Cheezburger is the internet. Do we have to figure out that same stuff for mobile now?
Yeah, actually, so I give the speech on a pretty regular basis called the form factor is the message, and it's based on the same idea that actually you mentioned, which started out with this media theorist named Marshall McLuhan. He said the medium is the message, and the idea was that based on the platform that you're using to view the content, that the content actually tends to change to fit the platform, and therefore the messages that's in the content tends to change from platform to platform. And so I've actually kind of updated that for the internet age, and where we're looking at a device that can do many things. Marshall McLuhan's day, you had a book for reading, TV for watching, and radio for listening music. Whereas today, everything can do everything. And therefore, how do you actually make a distinction between one medium versus another? And what we're seeing is that people are using their preference. It's how does this device fit my life? And that actually ends up influencing what people actually create for those platforms.
Yeah, it seems like you're almost, because people are so centered around themselves, like you mentioned, it's how it fits into their lifestyle. It almost seems like you're gonna have to offer everything on every platform and let them choose.
Well, so that's an incredibly wasteful way to do it, right? It's inefficient, right? So for a company like us with limited resources, we can't do that. Maybe MTV and Viacom can figure out how to do that, but I would argue actually that's not the best way to do it, because that dilutes the brand. That dilutes why people come to you.
Okay.
And you're actually seeing brands like MTV having a really difficult time figuring out mobile, right? Because the incentive system is, how do we put TV ads on television?
Gotcha.
And so I think you have a generation of companies like us that are trying to figure out, what does mobile entertainment really mean? That is not gaming, that is not, long form video. So how do we actually figure out how to entertain people? And it really comes down to individuals, individualization, mixing in social, mixing in the culture of remixing. So all that stuff is a set of ingredients that we got to figure out how to put correctly.
Yeah, no, it seems like you guys are figuring that out, and it seems like the Tumblrs of the world are figuring that out, and it's those companies that are kind of on the forefront. They're letting you reblog and remix and be a part of the content itself and the generation of it. Now, let me ask you about kind of the growth of I Can't Has Cheezburger, because like you said, you saw it as a business, and I believe when you bought the site, I think I read this somewhere, it might be reputable, I don't know, that it had around 500,000, monthly visitors.
Yeah.
At its height, how many monthly visitors or yearly visitors has the site gotten to, just so we have an idea of the business growth from acquisition to, at its high point?
Yeah, so when I bought the website, I Can Has Cheezburger, it was doing about 500,000 views per month. And then it started growing. And I actually don't remember off the top of my head how big it got, but it was several times. It was an order of magnitude larger by the time we started actually building other websites and things like that. So, we bought Failblog, we launched Memebase, we launched Failbook, we acquired Know Your Meme. So the network of Cheezburger became much larger than I Can Has. And I think right now I Can Has only accounts for a single-digit percentage of our traffic. So we're actually, it's kind of ironic. We started the whole, I'd like to think that we started the whole cat picture trend, but that's just part of the business. It's actually just, we are really in the general entertainment business for internet users at this point. And it's, at this point, I think we're doing several hundred million, impressions. We're close to 1 billion, impressions, because those page view metrics that's not even what we measure anymore, right? Because on mobile, it's difficult to measure page views. So, I think we're doing several, 100 million post impressions every single month.
Yeah, and you mentioned all the things you've kind of networked out to. You got the fail blog and the meme base. Some acquired, some bought, and some
Yeah.
created yourself. How do you know when you're not focusing as opposed to making good business decisions because the original thing is now single digit compared to the rest of it. So obviously it was the right decision for you. And yet sometimes when I start something new, I feel a little bit of guilt like, am I being a bad entrepreneur? How do you balance that?
I actually look at the pace of innovation as a measure of focus. So focus is impossible. Pace of innovation is impossible without focus. Okay. And so when I see my team continue to iterate and move the product in a really rapid way, I know that we are focused, right? So lack of focus doesn't allow innovation to occur, but having focus isn't the sole reason that innovation occurs. And so there's other ingredients like a clear vision, removing distractions, having a great organization. All that stuff is required to have a rapid pace of innovation to find that product market fit. And so I'm watching actually our team develop a brand new mobile app for our site. So we used to actually have multi-branded. So we were a house of brands. We had Failblog, Memebase, ICANN-Has, Know Your Meme. And what we're doing is we're consolidating it down to really two core brands that you can actually use to access everything else. So Know Your Meme and Cheezburger gives you access to everything else that's in our network, right? Know Your Meme because it's such a repository of knowledge and it's actually a really important place for the internet to go figure out how memes and viral phenomena occur. Cheezburger because it's an entertainment destination that you want to use to actually have fun. And so the Cheezburger app that we're developing right now allows you to access ICANN-Has, Failblog, Memebase, everything else that we've got under the sun, Geek Universe, all that. And so when we actually go out and build a platform for that, we have to think holistically. Okay, it's for multiple sites. How do we let people pick and choose? How do we let people customize that experience? Because we know that the average user visits 4 sites, right? And so we've actually learned all this stuff, and we're building a product based on that. And that product is heads and shoulders better than what we have out now.
Yeah.
So that tells me that we're focused, right? Because people know what the direction is, and they seem to be heading towards that at a very rapid pace.
Yeah. Now the site's grown a lot. All the sites have grown a lot since you've acquired them or created them. Is it because you were early in a trend that was going to grow no matter what, and you could have done nothing and still have these 100 million views like we talked about, or were there very practical, specific things you actually did to move the needle on growth?
I think I'm a lucky beneficiary of rising tide that floats all boats. So you can't. There's nothing better than a rising tide for business. Let's face it. There's nothing we could have done about it. We were at the right place at the right time. So that's one thing. The other thing I did was I continued to actually reduce the cost of failure. So when we first got started, we had one website called ICANN-Has Cheezburger, and Eric Nakagawa, one of the co-founders of ICANN-Has Cheezburger, we contracted with him to build another site for dogs, and so he built that, and so we ended up acquiring that with the site as well. That's a little known story, but and then after that, Eric rolled off to other stuff, and so I had 2 sites when we first got started in the first few months.
Okay.
After that, we ended up with a few experiments of working on political stuff, working on graph and chart related memes. So we had 4 sites, and then we started kind of rolling, and I realized that we were able to launch a new website every 2 months.
Wow.
That's not bad, right? Every 2 months
pretty
is pretty good. But if you think about it, in a year, if you launch a new website every 2 months, you launch 6 websites. That's not a lot. That's not a lot of iteration and testing because you have to assume that the majority of them will fail and not be profitable. So I ended up actually going back and rethinking how we did that. So our engineering team, our product team, and I sat down and said, I don't want to launch a new website every 2 months. I want to launch a new website every 2 weeks. Figure out how to do that. And so they came back and said, we can't do it on our existing platform. We're just going to use WordPress and crank out websites, and we can actually do that every 2 weeks because it doesn't have the overhead of the technology that we do, but we can't. It won't work the same as the ones that we have now, so we'll have to actually kind of dumb it down. Like you can't have our brand and all that stuff. Part of you says that's not acceptable. Here we're a company here, but I have to let that go because the pace of iteration is far more important than getting all those I's dotted and T's crossed. And so we ended up actually spinning up an entire new team within our company. We called it the farm team, and their job was to launch a new website every 2 weeks.
I got you. That makes a lot of sense.
6 websites a year to 26 websites a year.
And then you can go back and you can add your brand to the ones that work.
That's right.
And so it's a win-win.
That's right. And we ended up paying a lot of costs, after that because of integration and things like that. But we as a company would not have existed had we not shrunk the cost of failure. And so what happens to the mentality of people working on websites is, if I do this and it fails and I spent 2 months on it, well, there goes my job.
Mm-hmm.
If I do this and it fails and I only spent 2 weeks on it, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
Right? You just keep doing it. So it's not even just time. It's that the mentality and attitude of people who work there completely changes.
Yeah. It's great because it seems like the great entrepreneurs, they actually have a process for innovation. Innovation isn't just hire great people and hope they come up with great ideas. It's hire great people and introduce them to a process that allows them to innovate like clockwork. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think part of the joy and the charm of being an entrepreneur in this environment is that you're the agent of chaos, right? So you bring in really great people, right? Super talented, super experienced. They know what they're doing. They come to your company, and what do? You support them because you hire them for who they are, but you have to ask them for something that challenges the way they used to think about the world.
Yeah.
You didn't hire them to do exactly what they did at the last company. You want something for them. You want them to do something that is right for your company. And you must introduce what is constructive chaos.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the standard we live by. We must raise this to a higher standard. You hear that a lot, but it's true. So for us, when we hired our VP of product and our new product manager, and we rebuilt our engineering team from the ground up, we basically asked ourselves, what are the ingredients that's necessary for us to actually win in this world of mobile? Because we know my feeling is that entertainment will settle somewhere around 70 to 80% of its traffic coming from mobile devices in the next 2 years.
Wow. Yeah,
right?
that's huge.
We're now almost 60% mobile, therefore we are a mobile company.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Because we started out on desktop, we have to change the culture and identity of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So leadership has to introduce and believe in the chaos that they're creating.
I love that phrase, constructive chaos. I'm going to start using that one. All right. So let me ask you about Circa a little bit. Circa is lesser known because it's not a meme thing. It's not an I Can't Has Cheezburger cat photo. But I think it's as important just because of what it does. So tell us a little about Circa. What is it?
So it's a news consumption application for a mobile lifestyle. Okay. The idea here is that mobile isn't just a device. For Circa, it's that people actually are living their lives through their mobile phones. And so how do you bring news to people who are spending most of their time on mobile phones? And what's fascinating is that attitude has allowed Circa to actually win teenage news readers. I want to tell you how rare that is that you see.
I didn't know they existed.
Yeah, so that's kind of the running joke, right? It's like these millennials don't friggin' read news, right? Mm-hmm. That's not true. There was actually a panel, I think, in New York around media, and actually somebody asked the teens, like, well, what do you guys read to, what do you guys use to read news? And they're like, nothing. And then one teen stands up and says, hey, yeah, I use Circa. And it's just like our jaws hit the floor, right? It wasn't the intent. But because the experience is so efficient and so customizable and just so native to mobile platforms that kids are using it.
Yeah. So what would be different about Circa as opposed to going to the mobile CNN website? What is going to make it friendly and mobile and useful?
Yeah, so that's a great question. If you look at any other news application for mobile, what they're doing is taking the thing that they created for TV or desktop and just trying to shove it in the small form factor. And so their priority is about how do we fit all this crap into this tiny little device, right? And it's really difficult to do that. And we as adults are used to reading that format. And so we don't even know that we're, in that environment. But what Circa does is we atomize content. In other words, news is made up of very simple things. Location, time, events, quotes, facts, figures, right?
It's a formula.
Photos, videos, right. It's actually it's an assembly of these ingredients in a specific way. And what, I went to journalism school, so I know this. Journalists are paid to not only gather those facts, but also create a narrative out of it, right? And so there's gather facts, confirm information, really difficult to do, and then try to be a writer, right? And I remember this quote from my journalism instructor, and he was one of those, hard drinking, jaded kind of fellows, and he said, you know, you guys are in journalism school because all of you are afraid to get a job as a writer because you can't. Right? It's easier to get a job as a journalist, so you're just a bunch of failed writers. I just thought it was really funny. But
yeah, that's great.
that the narrative part is what makes the product a little bit different for Circa. We do create a narrative, but it is not the job of the single writer to tell you a story. For us, the story is being told by what is actually happening, and we can actually put you a little bit closer to the facts, quotes, maps, images by actually creating a format called atomization. And so here's what happens. Let's say Ferguson riots, right? That's happening right now. Something happens, and breaking news, and you go to NBC News or CNN or anybody else, and they'll have this big red banner across the top that says breaking news. Something happened. Or let's say Malaysia Airlines got shot over Ukraine. Malaysian Airlines plane shot down somewhere over Ukraine. What are they asking you to do after they see that headline? What do you do? Nothing. There's nothing. There's no news. And it basically says, look at all this information. We know nothing. Go away.
Okay, I gotcha.
That's basically what it is.
Breaking news. We have breaking news.
We have breaking news. We know nothing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Come back later. With Circa, because you can follow specific stories, individual stories, not topics, not people, but specific stories. When you see that headline, you can actually follow. And if you click that follow button, the next time there's an update, we push that update to the people who are following that story.
And the update could be any piece of that formula, another quote, another date, another event, another piece of truth that's been verified, not a piece of narrative for me to feel put another story in your mind.
Yeah, because the alternative is you actually go to the news website and they would have a new updated paragraph at the top, and everything else is exactly the same. The background is the same, all the stuff that you've already read. And halfway down the story, you're like, I've read this before.
Yeah.
What's new? And it's hard to know what's new. And sometimes they'll just change the headline for the same story, and you'll end up reading it twice and going, I just wasted my time.
Yeah. And it seems like now you get to supply your own narrative based on how you think these things might fit together instead of always having... And it's almost like the user-generated insight of I Can't Has Cheezburger. Let them create the entertainment. Let them have the narrative piece of the news. Is that fair?
That is absolutely correct. In fact, the kernel of idea about atomization actually came from Cheezburger. So we actually, at Cheezburger, when we were redeveloping our platform, we said, look, we think that the world of content should be made up of atoms that are actually portable and remixable. How do we actually create a platform that supports that? And so we ended up building the software to do it. And then I actually applied that concept to news, and I met up with Matt, and who ended up leading the company. Yeah. So that kernel of atomization is super important to us because we think that atomization allows not only the human beings to create a narrative that's interesting to them and personalize it for them, but it allows the machine to understand what pieces of information that the human being has read
you can tag it correctly.
That's right. Just tagging, categorization, sorting, actually relating one point to another. Because what happens in remixing is, hey, there's a blank image, and all these memes were created from it. How do we know that they all tie up to the same source? How do we know that it is the same meme?
Yeah. And so it seems like with this atomization insight, you've done it with entertainment, and now you're doing it with news. Could you do it with almost anything? I mean, is atomization, we hear software is eating the world. I can totally imagine atomization eating the world only because everything is going mobile where it needs to be atomized.
Yeah. I think it can. So, I mean, just thinking about this interview for a second, right? So this interview has a very specific structure, question and answer. And each question and each answer actually can be atomized. Yeah. So if you're able to actually say the machines can actually, let's say YouTube could do closed captioning actually correctly and actually knew what you were saying. Sure. You can actually say questions about outbound marketing, right? And you can actually now take Q&A for each outbound marketing question and answer and actually create an entire a corpus of that question that people can look at. I'm an outbound marketer. I only want to know stuff about outbound marketing. How do I do that on your platform?
Yeah. No, I think it's genius. I mean, when I think about what does Growth Hacker TV 2.0 look like, that's actually what comes to my mind is a list of text questions that you click on them and up pops the interview for that segment, and just this really atomized, way of doing it. So I think you're right. I mean, I think it could be applied to a lot of different industries. How much opportunity do you think there is for entrepreneurs that want to change news consumption? Is news something worth thinking about right now still? Or is Circa here, now you need to go do something else?
Well, for me, I'm all in on this one approach. We think that mobile, especially for a millennial, and there's a huge generation gap. I mean, like,
Yeah.
I grew up in news, on TV, and that's kind of how I got to where I am. But I was an early adopter to how news was published on the internet, and it was something that actually drove me to end up what I'm doing. But mobile is the next generation, and then beyond that, we'll have to figure out something else. But right now, I'm all into figuring out a mobile-based approach that is unique and different. And this idea called atomization actually begets far more interesting ideas about how data should be structured in news in general outside of mobile. So,
Yeah.
one of the point formats, one of the atom formats inside Circa is this thing called quote, right? It has the content of something somebody said, and it has a name and a title, and all the metadata related to it.
Sure.
What that allows us to do is actually create a database of knowledge about what anybody has said. Right? So you eventually, like, I think they're building this now in the new content management system in Circa, where you can actually look up a person's name and they'll tell you every quote they've ever said.
That's amazing.
Right? So
Yeah.
the atomization has this humongous benefit.
Yeah.
Right. So in Cheezburger, one of the things that we're trying to create is what I call the meme graph. The idea that somebody can actually take an image and remix it, and maybe they change the words, maybe they change the image, maybe they Photoshop something in there, but we want to be able to see how the genesis got started and how it ended up kind of branching off into other areas. And so Know Your Meme does that manually in a very anthropological way, but we want to give them the data to actually see how does this happen in real time.
Yeah. So with Circa, how hard has it been to grow a mobile app that is about news as opposed to a website that is about cat photos? It seems like the growth curves there would be very, very different. And it seems like Circa would be much harder to grow. Is that the case?
I think what you have here is a case of a longer-term product. I think news is something where you have to earn people's trust,
Yeah.
right? So you don't. Not only do you have to create content that's actually valid, viable, and actually interesting, but you also have to create this trust between the news organization, because Circa is something that Circa actually has editors whose job is to go write the content that we consume, not just create a mobile product that you can automate the content creation. And so there's all these kind of complex layering of issues that come with do I trust you as a news source?
Yeah.
That allows them to kind of build momentum over the long term. Whereas on Cheezburger, the viral curve looks very different. It's big spike, big drop, and you have to kind of keep adding the spikes together over and over again because things happen and then they disappear.
Yeah.
Whereas with news, especially with a follow model, you see this growth line, right?
Yeah.
They're building momentum over the long term.
Yeah, so you mentioned the meme curve there. So let me ask you a question about memes for a second. It seems like viral marketing and memes kind of go hand in hand. You're wanting something to get massive distribution really fast, and then it will drop off. It's not going to stay there forever. I want to ask you, what do the best memes have in common so that maybe as marketers we can learn from them? What is what is a great meme made of?
A great meme, I think, has two components. One is a visual exploitation. So, in other words, you see an image and it actually exemplifies an emotion or a moment or some zeitgeist that everybody kind of feels. So, the image has to have that identifiable quality. Right? So you see like pepper spray cop, for example, right? Like that moment of watching a cop pepper spray people who are just sitting on the ground. It's an iconic image about, that moment that was happening in time. Grumpy cat, right? Like it's a sad cat, like it depressed cat, even though cats don't have anything to be depressed about, but we know that about cats. And then the second component here is that every meme requires a Seinfeldian-like everyday quality. What we aren't looking for is extraordinary stories. These are not stories about something that we can't relate to or that are really kind of out there. They're really stories about us. Those captions are about things that we can relate to in our everyday life.
I love that. I've never heard anybody say that, and I don't know if you've said that other places. I'm sure you have. But visual exploitation and then a Seinfeld everyday quality that is the joke, not some bigger-than-life scenario. And I even think about the commercials on TV that are just hilarious to me. And they have both those qualities. Like I'm looking at it and I'm visually arrested. There's something being exploited visually. But then what's happening is not outlandish. It's like the Volkswagen, the kid that thinks he's Darth Vader. It's like I can see my kid doing that, and yet I love it.
Yeah, it's relatable. And what I think humor does is that it tells a truth without using the words to describe the truth. Right?
And so what comedians do.
Yeah, I think that's what's great about comedy is that it's a piece of art that says, I'm going to tell you something that is almost universal, that we can all relate to, but I'm going to do it in a non-obvious way.
Yeah.
Right? So Darth Vader and the Volkswagen ad is a great example of, here's what children do. Here's how imagination works, but I'm not going to talk about imagination. Right? I'm going to talk about something completely different and just tell you something that you can see yourself doing or see your kids doing.
Yeah. It's funny. There is some relationship between comedy and truth, and even marketing and truth. And if you can push truth far enough in the right way, you end up with something hilarious.
Yeah, actually, that's actually what I've pitched for South by Southwest next year.
Oh, really?
Is humor more powerful than truth today? Because we're more driven by a world in which entertainment is a requirement of the communication process.
Comedy Central is where I get more political news than CNN. I mean, there's a reason.
Well, you're probably a liberal then.
well, I said CNN, not MSNBC or Fox. I mean, I'm trying to stay in the middle here.
Right now we've got a bit of a partisan problem when it comes to comedy and news, but I'm pretty sure I'm sure they'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, I don't know if they'll figure that out. It's hard for me to imagine Fox being funny, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Oh, this has been great, Ben. I got one last question for you. It's the question I always end the interviews with, which is, what's the best advice you have for any startup that's trying to grow?
So I think this question gets asked me of a lot just because of the nature of the business that I'm in.
Sure.
That's like, can we do something viral for our product? And what I look at is, look, if you're doing something very social and you want to be able to kind of exploit what Facebook has to offer or Twitter has to offer and figure out how to actually create a traffic generation machine and kind of an algorithm hack that actually lets you gain followers or grow users, that's one thing. But if you're asking me if we can create a viral phenomenon to actually like drive the marketing of our product, my answer is no. Not because you can't do it, just because it's not your core business. And when you are 3, 4, 5 people working together to create a product, that is not a good use of your time. And so I know plenty of startups that's actually tried to do that against my advice, and usually they end up coming back and saying, it kind of worked, but didn't really do anything for our business.
Yeah. Well, they don't have the ability to run the experiments that you do, launching a new site every 2 weeks, to find the one thing that actually catches on. They have to put all their energy into one thing and hope it works. Yeah,
they have to build value into their product. And we do what we do because that is our product, not because it's marketing, right?
Yeah.
So.
You are the meme. Well, Ben, thank you so much for coming on Growth Hacker TV. This has been an awesome interview.
Thank you very much.